Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Unfortunately, I did listen to this on an audiobook, so I don't have a cover to share with you. Donald Ray Pollock was actually a very interesting life story. He started writing relatively late in life. He graduated from The Ohio State University in 2009 with an MFA. Around that same time, he came out with his first published work, which was a collection of short stories called Knock 'em Stiff, which is one of the settings in this book, The Devil All the Time. This was kind of famously made into a Netflix movie a few years back, starring Tom Holland as well as a bunch of other people. I think Robert Pattinson has a role as well in that movie. But is kind of a complicated story to summarize, but I'll try to do my best without spoiling it. It centers around a character whose name is Arvin. It's primarily set in kind of two different periods, one period right after World War II and one other period that's set in roughly the 60s, I think the early to mid 60s. And Arvin, has lost his parents through a sequence of events and is living with his paternal grandmother, her brother, his uncle, and a young girl named Lenora, who's just a couple years younger than him, a year or two younger than him, who also has her own kind of tragic backstory where she lost both of her parents as well. And the story is really him coming to grips with the violence that is in his past in terms of his parents. One of them died very violently, and the other one had an illness that took hold of her. And he had a very traumatic childhood growing up, and the book is really centered around him deciding what to do with this violence. There's a lot of questions of faith. There's a lot of his paternal grandmother is a very, very religious person. The woman, the young girl that she's brought into the house, is also very pious. And so there's a kind of a theme that underlines the entire book about as far as faith and religion is very important. So along with that story, there's also the story of a pair of serial killers who go around different areas of the country and asking men to pose. They call them models. They ask men to pose in photos with one of the serial killers, the female serial killer, before the male serial killer kills them. And so that's another theme of another characters that we follow throughout the book, is these two serial killers as they go out and do this work. And then finally, there is a preacher and his sidekick who have left, I believe it's West Virginia, to go down to Florida and kind of travel around to kind of escape an old life. So those are kind of the three branches. It's very hard to not spoil the book and also give you what it feels like a through line of it. And so I tried very hard not to spoil it, and that's the best I could do. There's a lot there. Arvin's father has a whole backstory that goes on for quite a long time. But it is a very, very, very dark book. Like, if you're the type of person who... Hurricane Season was a book that I reviewed for the channel. Day of the Locust is a book that I reviewed for the channel. If both of those books didn't feel dark enough for you, then this may be up your alley. It's very, very dark. There's probably, half a dozen trigger warnings that you could go on in this book. There's everything from implied pedophilia, there's murder, there's suicide, there's all kinds of just really kind of unwanted sexual content. It's just all kinds of stuff that's very, very dark about this book. I think that Donald Ray Pollock is a very, very good writer. He has his own style and his own voice that's very strong throughout the book. I think he does a good job of a couple places of subverting expectations. There's one part with Arvin's father especially, there's one part where you think it's going to go one way, but he clearly kind of pulls a U-turn on you and goes somewhere else, which I really appreciated. I think the opening chapter does a good job of setting the tone of the book, where Arvin's father is coming back from the Second World War, and that whole opening chapter of him being on a bus with the bus driver, I thought was very... you basically get the tone of the book and the feeling of the book all in this chapter of just how everybody is awful, and there are very few I would say, good characters. I think Arvin, in of himself, is probably the closest thing you have to a pure hero in this book, and he is very much, I would say, an anti-hero and has his own shades of gray in his own life. But I think he's probably the closest thing that you have to a protagonist. The book is kind of set in two different places. It's set in areas of West Virginia and it's set in areas of Ohio. I think Donald Ray Pollock does a very good job of naming all these characters and gives you a larger sense of the world, and that felt very real and very naturalistic. I think there are parts where you see an interaction between two different characters from both of their viewpoints, and how there may be two characters who just kind of can't stand each other, and you kind of see that relationship through the eyes of both the characters. And I thought that was really well done. The relationship between the male serial killer and his wife's brother is like one of my favorite relationships in the book, because they're both terrible people and they both can't stand each other. So whenever you kind of flip back and forth between the two of them, it's always fun, because it's just like these two people who are both terrible hate each other, and I always thought that was very fun. On the con side, he has a stylistic thing where the book is broken up, I think, into like 50 chapters. I read this on audiobook, and he has a stylistic thing where he ends the chapter relatively abruptly, and kind of jerks me out of the book a couple times, where it didn't feel like the chapter came to a very like easy landing. It was very much like, I'm going to write a last line, and that will be the end of this chapter. Like I said before, the book is set in a few different places. And so sometimes I thought that the geography was a little bit confusing if we were in West Virginia, or if we were in Meade, Ohio, or if we were in Knockemstiff. And so it was hard for me to sometimes get the geography of the different places in my head clear, because there are a lot of named characters, and it was questionable. Is this character here? Is this character here? Where is this character? And then back, as well as sometimes that I felt like the timeline is a little bit difficult to understand, because sometimes you're jumping back and forth in time. And then finally, the only other thing that I can think of, one of the subplots of the subplots that I mentioned kind of just ends pretty abruptly. And he also has the thing where he has these characters that he needs you to know about later in the book, but he doesn't have anything for them to do for a while. So there's a chapter or two where he's just like, here's what these characters are doing. They're not going to do anything necessarily interesting, but if you were wondering where they were, this is where they were. And so there was a couple times where I was like, okay, we just kind of jump in to see these characters, and then we kind of go back to another point just for him to remind you that the characters are still there. It wasn't anything that was like terrible, and I think overall the book is really, really, really well done. But in terms of my excitement as a reader, I was kind of that pulled me out of the book a little bit. But overall, who would I recommend this book to? I think this book is for people who like really, really dark crime fiction, or fiction dealing with Appalachia, or just kind of the underbelly of the human experience. Then I think you may really like this. I would not recommend this to any children. I would probably not even really recommend it to most college students. It is very, very dark, and I think you have to be in the right mindset or mood to really enjoy it. But I think it is really well done, and I think that I would be interested to see what he does in the future, because I think the voice is there in his writing style. I think it's very... the way that he writes is very... easy to read, and it's very propulsive. I listened to this on audiobook in like 2 or 3 days, and he has a propulsion and a structure to his stuff to where you feel the scope of the world, but it never feels so unwieldy that you feel lost in terms of who these characters are and what their motivations are and stuff. And so I really enjoyed it. It is very, very dark, but if you can get over that, or that doesn't bother you, then I think that there's a lot here to recommend. So this is The Devil All the Time, Donald Ray Pollock. I'm going to be reviewing a writing craft book by James Scott Bell next week that's also going to be an ebook, so unfortunately I don't have a cover to share with you on that. But if you like the video, please subscribe to the channel if you can, and or hit the like button. Until I'll leave my Twitter link below, and I'll leave links to the reviews of The Day of the Locust, as well as reviews for, now I'm blanking on what the other book is, but I'll leave some link below. That one of them is going to be The Day of the Locust. I'll leave those for you below if that's something you're interested in. So until next time, bye.